René, what do you think about when you think about AI?
Not anything great. It's mostly kind of apocalyptic scenarios like deepfakes, ChatGPT stealing my job, that kind of thing.
Which is not terribly uncommon, and I think I share some of these concerns. But then the other day I was thinking, I was crossing border checks at the airport. And so I went through the automatic ones, the biometric ones. You slide your passport in, and then you have to go through the facial recognition screen. And it got me thinking, this is the same technology that was just regulated by the AI Act that the EU passed. In the AI Act, biometric tech and facial recognition, among them, have been deemed as posing an unacceptable risk. What does this artificial intelligence legislation change for consumers, for us, really? Let's try and break it down with the help of an insider and find out if we are getting there. Hi, I'm Elena Pompei.
And I'm René Bertini.
And this is Getting There, a podcast by ENTR in partnership with France 24 and RFI.
We're two Italian journalists, we live in France and we work in English. And we're part of the first generation who could truly see what a united Europe looks like.
We move and we can work freely across Europe, and we can use the same currency in almost every EU country. So we're asking ourselves, what's next for the EU and how do we get there? Luca Bertuzzi is a tech journalist. He's worked as the tech editor for Euractiv. And so he followed negotiations between EU member states and within the institutions very closely.
The European Commission has taken a very ambitious approach to digital policy, saying, we want to use new technologies, but not at any cost and at our conditions. And that's the underlying assumption of the AI Act. It introduces some bans on AI applications that are deemed to be unacceptable by European values.
The Artificial Intelligence Act is trying to set up a scale for the risk that certain types of artificial intelligence pose, the threat that they pose, and then they match with that a certain type of requirement in terms of their transparency, right? So we have 4 different levels of risk. The first level, the highest risk, which is deemed unacceptable, is the one for biometric technology.
In the AI Act, there were 2 areas that were particularly controversial. The law enforcement area with remote biometric identifications as the core topic. Of course, politics is about compromise.
You have 2 very different perspectives when it comes to biometrics that come into place. You had kind of the more law and order oriented countries like France and Italy, for example. You felt very strongly about allowing law enforcement to keep on using facial recognition and associated technologies to counter terrorism, for example. Whereas you had a very valid concern on the other side that was about preserving citizens' privacy.
So law enforcement can still use biometrics in cases of terrorism to counter terrorism, but the definition of terrorism itself is not given in the text. So that opens up to another number of grey zones.
Exactly. So I think we need some help to break it down. Andrea Baldrati is a lawyer, and so he co-founded Privacy Network. So he has a different perspective on this law.
Exceptions allowing the use of such facial recognition systems require compliance with strict conditions and in the presence of serious crime, imminent terrorist threats, or, for example, in the case of searching for a kidnapping victim. These exceptions could pave the way for expensive mass surveillance, compromising individual privacy and freedom. These systems are error-prone and risky by design.
Facial recognition is being used by US law enforcement, for example, and we have enough information to know that it's not safe. It poses a security threat, a public safety issue, and it's fundamentally flawed.
Exactly, it's flawed. I think we've seen a lot of headlines showing that the law enforcement in the US that had been using consistently facial recognition to identify suspects on criminal cases had wrongfully arrested or prosecuted suspects because the AI was simply wrong, due especially to the color of the skin. So the most wrongfully prosecuted were people of color, black people, the elderly, and even non-gender confirming individuals.
So it really is no surprise that it's deemed a high-risk technology and, I quote, unacceptable.
What struck me is that the following levels of transparency aren't nearly as strongly put. So this is the first level, and then you have all AI systems. So everything that pertains to particular areas like legal, border control, where all of these AI systems, which can also have to do with toys or aviation, for example, have to be checked before being put on the market and then all throughout their cycle on the market. And this is high risk technology, so the second level. And then you have generative AI.
According to the ranking system that this act poses, generative AI is only ranked as third risk level. That means what it has to do to comply with this regulation is simply apply a watermark saying that this content is made with AI. This watermark thing doesn't prevent people from using generative AI to just pollute what is already out there. So imagine already now this information spreads extremely fast. If we add an AI factor to this, so something that can write posts or create images super fast with no human intervention, maybe just a little prompt, that poses an extreme risk for disinformation, especially in a year like this one where it's full of elections coming up.
I know, and it's, I think, something that we were kind of trying to wrap our heads around when we were reading this text is the fact that this information is only mentioned 3 times in the text, right? And misinformation only once. And I think we were quite surprised by the answer that Luca gave us.
The AI Act is a product safety legislation, so it conceives AI systems as products. The matter of disinformation is already dealt at the level of platforms under the Digital Services Act. So if you take a platform like TikTok or Facebook, they will have to put in place some risk mitigation measures.
So the DSA, which Luca mentioned, is the Digital Services Act, which is another European regulation that became effective in August 2023. And in short, lawmakers are saying it's not the AI software itself or the algorithm itself that causes misinformation, is its misuse from social media platforms.
So it's not regulating all of the ecosystem that exists around AI, it's just regulating the technology itself and not its use.
And now, of course, what emerged with AI in the past years is that it's getting more and more sophisticated in terms of deepfakes. So on this specific development, the legislator intervene by introducing some watermarking, and that needs to make clear that when you are interacting with content that has been artificially manipulated or generated.
It's changed so much. For example, I remember there was this famous AI-generated video of, I think it was Will Smith eating spaghetti. And they made the same one, like, I don't remember how much time later, 3 or 6 months. And it was so much better. Like, the first one was insane. He was shoving spaghetti up his nose. It made no sense. And the second version, it looked real. It's crazy. And that was just in the space of a few months.
The main limit of the AI Act is precisely the fact that it's trying to regulate a technology that is changing every few months. Already by the time the AI Act was proposed, it was made outdated by ChatGPT, which was basically not regulated under the law. The point is that to a good extent, what's in the AI Act is written in the sand because it can change at any moment in time.
So one of the fundamental vulnerabilities of this text is the fact that, yes, we can create guidelines, we can create regulation around it, but in a few years, even 6 months, 3 months' time, this technology could be completely different.
Who knows, with the developments in AI technology, for example, how its implementation is going to look and how long it's going to take for it to actually become effective.
The approach that was followed in the AI Act was to put a new entity, the AI office that will be within the European Commission, in charge of overseeing how the rules are applied to foundation models. At the national level, there will be authorities in charge of monitoring how AI systems providers are applying the new rules.
We, as Europe, we are the first ones to put out a legislation like this, which puts us forward as this being the starting point, the guideline for any following AI regulation in the world.
Everybody else will have to look at this text and build up from that. It will set a legal precedent. Even in the development phase, they're going to have to think about that if they want to access the EU market, which is not irrelevant.
It will be a huge task for regulators to keep up with technological and market developments. But, when you hear this sort of argumentation, that's also an excuse not to do anything. You have to start somewhere. I think we have a law now, and it will be up to the regulators to make it work.
So thank you for being with us today, and we'll see you next week.
This episode of Getting There was hosted by Elena Pompei and René Bertini, produced by Elena Pompei and René Bertini, filmed by Guillaume Guguin. Thank you to France 24 and RFI for technical support, and thank you to our guests, Luca Bertuzzi and Andrea Baldrati, for their time and expertise.